NHGKL78RN. Hartville Hardware Store here. They carry both brands.
Welcome to SDR School Part 3. We'll be discussing SDR software, comparing some features, and try to put it all together. Software defines our radios. I guess that's why we call them software-defined radios. Pretty much all the hardware we've been talking about so far serves only one purpose: to run the software and the firmware. That's the software that's more or less permanently installed inside. Many features of different SDR software are similar. You can pretty much count on a nice spectrum waterfall and variable width filter. I thought I would focus on things I thought were a little unique. If you don't agree with me, at least I got you thinking. All the radios have a means to interconnect with so-called digital programs, PSK31, SSTV, FT8, and more. They can do it without extra boxes, like Signal Link too. All can be remotely controlled, some more easily than others. I will, however, not be talking about specifics relating to interfacing or remote control. Each of my 6 radios has its own software provided by the manufacturer, and Windows is pretty much the standard platform. The RSP-1A comes with SDR Uno. The Calibre Nano and Sun SDR2 QRP come with Expert SDR2, a version of which is used by all Expert Electronics radios. That software is also available in Linux and Mac versions, a plus for those with an aversion to Windows. The Hermes board normally uses Open HPSDR-MRX. It's a modification of the original open source Power SDR used by the pre-6000 series radios from Flex Radio. And it can display 2 spectrum waterfalls up to 384 kilohertz. In fact, that software, as well as the Hermes board, is open source, meaning that source code and full technical information is available. There are some alternative software options as well, such as Thetis being developed as an upgrade. All ELAD radios use their own software, SW2, which can support up to a 6 megahertz spectrum and up to 8 receivers, displayed in a wide variety of spectra. The Flex 6000 series uses Flex's own Smart SDR proprietary Windows software, with at least 2 receivers and 2 spectra depending on the model. In early 2019, Flex announced Multi-Flex, allowing 2 remote locations to operate a single radio simultaneously. That creates some interesting possibilities. There's other software for a Mac or iPad. The Maestro may be used in lieu of a computer, or the Flex 6400M and 6600M can be used standalone. Flex Radio touts that their direct sampling radios do all the DSP in the radio, with the computer providing only control. Ed, K8MEJ, allowed me to remotely connect to his Flex 6400. I found the Smart SDR software to be intuitive, and I quickly felt at home. Hardly realized Ed's station was 100 miles away. The ICOM 7300 and 7610 don't even need a computer. They have knobs and a display, and the 7610 can now also run with the popular free HDSDR software, a big plus in my view. The ICOM R8600 receiver samples at 122.88 megahertz and surprisingly can also be used with the HDSDR software. On the other hand, the ELAD FDM Duo can stand alone or use ELAD's SW2 or HDSDR or even an Android tablet via a Bluetooth link. And let's not forget the firmware used by the FPGAs and microprocessors that are inside the radio. The ELAD FDM Duo has firmware for each of its 3 microprocessors and the FPGA and USB. Various radios have different processes for upgrading firmware, some easier than others. I saw a button in the Expert SDR2 software labeled Firmware Upgrade. The instructions say only to press the button, so I pressed the button. A progress bar appeared and in a few seconds notified me that the firmware had been upgraded. Pretty painless. I'll point out some highlights, but you'll need more than that to fully utilize the software. Do a search for an SDR you might be considering, and you can find a lot. Much SDR software can run without a radio, and even playback IQ spectrum files, where an entire spectrum has been recorded, and you can tune to any frequency within that spectrum. You can get pretty familiar with a radio's software even before you buy it. On my QRZ page at qrz.com, you'll find my favorite SDR links, my videos on the ELAD FDM Duo, and much more. SDR software makes click tuning and drag tuning using the spectrum waterfall the easiest tuning method ever. The mouse wheel, or possibly a real tuning knob, can then be used for fine tuning. A wide range of tuning steps is available. You typically can hover over a digit in the frequency readout to change that digit with the mouse wheel, making coarse tuning or fine tuning available immediately. Type in a frequency. There are band buttons and memories. You can get an SDR that has knobs and buttons, or you can add them. Simultaneously receiving multiple frequencies is pretty standard for SDRs. I'd like to talk about a number of features that are available only on some radios. You can decide how important any particular feature might be to you. None of the radios I have, nor any I've heard about, have everything, so just paying big bucks won't get you the whole works. These days, you don't even have to pay big bucks for top-notch performance, all courtesy of the SDR. The first feature I'll discuss is not a single feature at all, but my overall impression. When I first started using Open HP SDR MRX with my Hermes board, I didn't have many thoughts regarding the user interface. It was pretty much like my first encounter with Power SDR on my Flex 3000. And that seemed pretty easy and intuitive. The day-to-day usage seemed easy enough to master, but there were many options buried in the menus that I had never seen before. It would take time to master the intricacies of the myriad of menus. Of course, the radio worked fine. It would just be a while before I would learn how to make it better. That's true of any SDR, and probably true for any fairly recent transceiver. They're all pretty complex these days. The Open HP SDR software and the Hermes board seemed natural and intuitive to me from the beginning. When I added the ELAD FDM Duo, the transition seemed pretty easy. Having the knobs and buttons available on the radio was a nice addition to the SW2 software. Being able to use the radio standalone is good for portable use, or if your computer crashes in the middle of a QSO. Nah, that would never happen. When the radio is being used standalone, it tunes only one frequency, as any basic radio, but the SW2 software adds 8 receivers and much more. The software displays the usual array of controls and the ubiquitous spectrum waterfall display. You can click tune anywhere in the spectrum waterfall or drag tune using 3 drag bars below. You can drag slow, fast, or really fast. Maximum spectrum width is about 6 megahertz. The Duo is limited to a maximum spectrum width of about 384 kilohertz, though, when using the second spectrum, which ELAD calls channel 2. Each channel can have up to 4 subreceivers. In addition, each of the 8 subreceivers can have its own spectrum waterfall, in its own separate window to show a tighter view of the received frequency. It's really nice to have both a wide spectrum view along with a close-up around the received frequency. There's an audio spectrum as well for each of the two channels. What strikes me most about this software is the ability to customize just about everything. What appear to be 16 band select buttons can be reconfigured and labeled as you wish. You can define bands anywhere and assign default filters, modes, and tuning step for each. Think about it. If you should enter, say, the 40-meter CW band by any means, memories, band switching, or even just tuning, you'll have your favorite mode, filter, and tuning step set for you. Notice that each of the 4 receivers changes as it is moved between the phone and CW portion of the band. Of course, you can manually change them anytime. Save and recall all the settings in a profile. You can record just audio or a complete spectrum, even a full 6 megahertz. You can define the format for automatic file naming of those IQ spectrum files to include date, time, frequency, and mode information in a format you like. You can set a timer to record an entire spectrum, maybe to see what the bands are doing while you sleep. While audio recording is pretty standard in SDRs, not all can record an entire spectrum. Timestamps can be added to the waterfall, and the waterfall can really be slowed down. In tracking down some intermittent noise, I was able to see 6 hours in the waterfall, and the timestamps enabled me to see when the noise was present. You can even use the software to reset some of the parameters in the radio itself to determine how it functions even in the standalone operation. Nothing I've seen compares to the customizing options available in SW2. If you'd like to simplify things a bit, you can run the Blue Duo app in an Android tablet. It gives you a simple spectrum waterfall, some band buttons, and direct control of many functions. Complete status information is displayed in large, easy-to-read characters. No wiring needed as Bluetooth provides a wireless link to the Duo. While the Duo using SW2 is the king of customizing, the Expert SDR2 software used by the Calibri Nano and the Sun SDR2 QRP is my pick for user interface. Most adjustments can be made with one single step, and the display is smooth as silk. Operations that might require a slider or even a menu in other software can be accomplished by grabbing what you wish to change. Thus, there are only a few sliders, and they have large, easy-to-grab pads. A unique feature of the Expert SDR2 software is the ability to automatically remember the last 16 frequencies you have tuned. You can open a drop-down menu and choose one, or step forward and backward through the list. ELAD's SW2 offers a wide range of keyboard shortcuts, but it's no match for the 200-plus custom keyboard shortcuts available in the Expert SDR2 software. Assign them to any key you wish. Since I already knew the ELAD shortcuts, I duplicated them in the Expert software. At first, I was not much of a fan of keyboard shortcuts, but once I became accustomed to using them, I found them to be very helpful. When using the Expert SDR2 software with the Sun SDR2 QRP, you can have 2 receivers in each of the 2 spectrum displays for a total of 4 receivers. You can open yet another spectrum waterfall, which covers the complete 60 MHz Nyquist zone you are using. You can click tune anywhere in this 60 MHz span for instant tuning, anywhere. Each of these spectra can be zoomed over a wide range, maintaining good resolution. You can separate RX2 from the main window, creating another window. You have the same options with the 60 MHz spectrum waterfall, as well as a variety of other special purpose windows like memories, a receive mixer, an equalizer for each receiver, and even a large easy-to-read S-meter. Transmit audio has very complete processing along with graphs to show what you're doing. This can be used for the two mic inputs on the radio as well as the computer mic. And it all can be stored as a profile, making it easy to receive a variety of settings. A single button press initiates audio recording of the tuned frequency, while another button records the complete spectrum. However, the spectrum can only be played in another application, used only for spectrum playback. This process could use a little more polish. The ELAD SW2 wins my vote for the best spectrum record playback. Be aware that some software doesn't even support spectrum recording. The ability to display data about stations extracted from various databases or files can be handy, but not all SDR software can do it. Typically, you'll see data from CW Skimmer, DX clusters, an EIBI database of shortwave broadcast stations around the world, or maybe from your own memory files. Here we see the ELAD SW2 display of a memory I created to mark the edge of a CW band. Information about shortwave broadcast stations all over the world is available in the EIBI database. Here, that data is overlaid on a spectrum in ELAD's SW2 software. The Expert SDR2 software can display all this various data as dots at the top of the spectrum display, but the information only appears when the mouse hovers over the dot. Flex Radio has recently added a similar feature to their Smart SDR software. OpenHP SDR and the Apache Labs radios offer a few features found nowhere else. Pure signal is a technique that reduces transmit distortion to almost nothing. To do this, it monitors your final amplifier output, even a separate power amplifier, and constantly compares the output to the low-level transmit signal created in the radio. Any difference is recognized as distortion. That's stuff that creates splatter. It then pre-distorts the signal it creates in the opposite direction, canceling amplifier distortion, creating the cleanest distortion-free signal ever. Here you can see a very strong and clean signal from WA8KHP using pure signal. See the straight lines of the signal all the way down to the band noise. Compare that to most signals. Another clever feature unique to OpenHP SDR is a technique called minimum phase. It's a substitute for the traditional linear phase process used to create digital filters. That traditional process can create very sharp, steep-sided filters. Unfortunately, there is a compromise between the sharp filters and the delay caused by the process used to create them. If you want sharp filters, you'll have to accept longer delay or latency. Flex Radio's Smart SDR allows you to adjust filter sharpness and hence delay. W8NX measured a delay range of 50 to 160 milliseconds on his Flex 6500. Minimum phase completely negates that dilemma. You can now have your cake and eat it too. Low latency and sharp filters are now possible. There's a link to NR0V's presentation on this technique on my QRZ page. As today's Apache Labs have two hardware receivers, diversity reception is possible. As I mentioned briefly in Part 2, OpenHP SDR takes full advantage of this and allows you to control the relative phase and amplitude of signals from two antennas to steer directivity. You can thus peak signals or null noise. While other radios have dual receivers, I've not seen these important adjustments. The receivers I have all use their own provided software, or you can optionally use other software like HDSDR. However, all my receivers are only capable of one main receiver with its spectrum waterfall and its associated sub-receivers, not the multiple spectra available in the Hermes, Duo, and Sun SDR QRP transceivers. Since I've already discussed the ELAD SW2 and Expert SDR2 software, I'd like to talk a little about the RSP1A and some software options. SDR Uno is the native software used by the RSP1A. My main objection SDR Uno is the clutter and confusion caused by many separate windows. There are 6 of them. They're difficult to size and align so they look neat. However, you can and should save any workspace you have taken the time to arrange. It adds another identical spectrum to display the 2nd and 3rd and 4th receiver, plus 2 additional control windows for each receiver and an audio spectrum for each. That's 16 windows for the 4 receivers. I hope you have several monitors. I have a friend who likes SDR Uno, so I guess ultimately you'll have to figure it out for yourself. You can learn to use it though, and it does work well. A simpler alternative is SDR Console or maybe HDSDR. HDSDR is very popular free software that can be used with a wide variety of receivers and a few transceivers. As with much generic software, it requires an EXTIO DLL file to interface the radio. That file is unique for each radio and software combination, and HDSDR provides a link to obtain that file. The HDSDR software provides a button labeled EXTIO, which opens a window to provide some controls specific to the radio you're using. In this case, since I'm using the SDR Play RSP1A, you'll find some gain and configuration adjustments for that radio. If I were using different hardware, different controls would appear. HDSDR has 2 frequency readouts, one for the LO or local oscillator, which is always the center of the complete spectrum, although it might not look that way as you may be zoomed into only a portion. The tuned frequency can be anywhere in the spectrum. Remember the direct conversion technique I talked about in part 1? That's the local oscillator we're talking about, even though it may be simply math in direct sampling receivers. Generic software like HDSDR and most proprietary software uses the I and Q created by the radio. This I and Q interface has become somewhat of an unofficial standard as it is used by many SDRs. HDSDR provides controls to compensate for the lack of precision in I and Q that were created as less than perfect analog signals. This allows for small corrections in amplitude and phase to be made in I and Q, thus improving the rejection of unwanted signals in the opposite sideband. You know, that wide imaginary sideband I discussed in part 1? These corrections are not needed for direct sampling radios as they are created with precision and long-term stability. ELAD states that rejection of that unwanted digital image is over 100 dB. This is not even possible without direct sampling. In addition to the RF spectrum waterfall, there's an audio spectrum waterfall. Manual notch filters can easily be placed there, and these manual notch filters are much easier to use than most. Not all software even has manual notch filters. While automatic notch filters are also available, the manual ones just work better. HDSDR can tune only one frequency. I installed another generic program, SDR Console, to work with the SDR Play RSP1A. It's pretty full-featured and offers multiple receivers within a single spectrum. SDR Console offers a unique option to use the highly parallel processing in NVIDIA graphics cards to do some of the DSP processing. Surprisingly, SDR Console does not require an EXTIO file, as does HDSDR. While offering some nice features, SDR Console takes some effort to master, and I didn't spend a lot of time with it. Although, all things considered, SDR Console is turning out to be my first choice for use with the RSP1A. The RSP1A covers VHF and UHF, which are not fully supported in any of my other radios, at least not without adding some filters or maybe a preamp. If VHF and UHF are important to you, this receiver is ready to go. The RSP1A performs remarkably well for a $100 non-direct sampling receiver. I want to emphasize, though, It is not in the same league as direct sampling radios. As you've probably figured out by now, I'm a big fan of direct sampling SDRs. So I'd like to point out some differences between the RSP1A and my direct samplers. While discussing HDSDR, I pointed out a window opened by the EXTIO button, containing a number of controls specific to the RSP1A. It's complicated. Compare that to the HDSDR EXTIO window for the ELAD S1. You can enable the 20 dB attenuator and enable the 30 megahertz low-pass anti-aliasing filter. There's a separate section to activate some controls on the external I/O connector, which we're not using. That's it! Look at the SDR Play EXTIO window. There is a gain setting for the LNA. You can enable filters to reject broadcast bands and set parameters for the IF amplifier. There are settings for the A to D converter and an output gain control. When these controls are properly set, the RSP1A works surprisingly well. Otherwise, you're likely to get distortion or worse from overloading, or at the other extreme, have low sensitivity. Direct sampling makes all this so much simpler in the S1. If you have an RSP1A, learn to use these controls. You'll be rewarded. These controls must also be set when using SDR Uno or SDR console software, although they look a little different. So how do you know when you've set things properly? If you look at the spectrum created in most SDR software, you'll notice most of the time when you adjust an attenuator or a preamp, nothing seems to happen, making proper adjustment even tougher. That's because the spectrum display and the S-meter readings are corrected to compensate for any preamp or attenuator changes. This allows the spectrum and S-meter to remain calibrated, even when attenuators or preamps are changed. If gains are set too high, you might get distortion or maybe complete breakup if you overload the A to D. That's easy to recognize.
It's big time. Yeah, and it's not the whole thing isn't like that, but there's places where, the top is in there and it's like almost a quarter of an inch.
But how do you know if you have too much attenuation and you're losing sensitivity? Here's a simple test. Disconnect the antenna, or maybe switch to a dummy load. If the noise floor and the S-meter drop, then you have adequate gain. That means atmospheric noise is the limiting factor, and that any more gain will only increase that noise along with wanted signals, while reducing available headroom for strong signals. Let's look at the effect a strong signal has on a nearby weak signal. Here is where direct sampling shines. No front-end filter can help with a signal that's just a few kilohertz away, so the front end must simply accommodate it. I'm not talking about gross overloading, such as might happen on field day, but just 40 or 50 dB over S9 signals that crop up once in a while.
I wish you and your family the very best at the holiday coming up. A happy Easter to you. I think I may make one more call to see if I hear anything coming out of
The direct samplers all worked without a glitch. The RSP1A took some tweaking to keep it from badly overloading, and I still couldn't keep a strong signal from somewhat affecting the received signal.
Hello, CQDX, Italy, United 2, Juliet, Mike, Zulu.
Dynamic range is one of the reasons I prefer my direct sampling radios. With my very first SDR, a Flex 3000, I came to appreciate a new control that Flex called AGC threshold, or automatic gain control threshold. Its operation is similar to the familiar RF gain control it replaced. I've observed some confusion about its adjustment, so I'd like to talk about it a bit. In one forum discussion, someone asked where to set it. That's like asking where to set the frequency dial. AGC threshold is not a set and forget control. Unlike many RF gain controls, it does not reduce overall sensitivity. In the ICOM 7300 and 7610, the RF gain appears to be an analog control before the A to D converter. By reducing the signal before it even gets digitized, sensitivity and thus signal to noise suffer. You even see the spectrum display change. All my SDRs have an AGC threshold control, although some software only labels it as RF. AGC threshold does exactly what it says. It adjusts the threshold where the AGC kicks in. AGC threshold sets a signal strength below which the gain will not be increased by the AGC. Thus, noise will not be excessively amplified, bringing up noise during quiet periods. OpenHP SDR MRX, as used with the Apache Labs radios, has a really nice graphic to aid in the adjustment of AGC threshold. This horizontal line shows the level below which the gain will not be increased. We can move the line itself or adjust the slider. If we set it near the peak of a signal we wish to hear, noise will not rise to fill the void during pauses. However, if a really strong signal appears, the AGC will kick in to keep it from blasting us.
Kilo Juliet for Oscar Alpha Papa Stroke Mobile. Glad to hear you again. This time number 118, 118.
Roger, roger. Copy 118. Mike Delta, please copy number 068. Number 068 from Alpha Lima Lima, QSL.
Is that 068?
I like to adjust it so that I can hear some noise during pauses. That way I can hear a weak braking station. Then, if necessary, readjust the AGC threshold to hear that station. The biggest mistake is to bring up the volume to hear a weak station. A strong station will then knock you out of your chair. Leave the volume alone and readjust the AGC threshold for adequate volume for the weaker station. Learn to use it and you will love this control. The major downside of SDRs is latency, or delay, caused by all the processing and interfacing between the radio and the computer. Delay in superhet radios is insignificant and can be ignored. Those running SDRs using full break-in CW are bothered by delay the most. Thankfully, CW transmit delay has been reduced to an inconsequential 5 to 10 milliseconds. At least in any SDR transceivers I'm familiar with. This was accomplished by giving this task to the FPGA. FPGAs are flat out faster than even the fastest microprocessor. To get a real-world view of the effects of delay, consider this. Sound travels at a little over 1,000 feet per second, which is about 1 millisecond per foot. So if you're talking to someone face-to-face 10 feet away, you're experiencing a 20 millisecond round-trip delay. If your radio speaker is 5 feet away, that's 5 milliseconds. Sitting in the back row at a theater or concert, that could easily be a delay of 100 milliseconds, or maybe a lot more. Let's listen to some signals that have not been delayed, along with signals with various delay times. This will hopefully give you a better idea of the effects of delay.
$45. That includes free talk and text and unlimited data. I did not make a mistake. $45 a line. Free talk, and text, and unlimited data. Spectrum. I don't know. Nothing really.
He brings a lot to the table, Triv.
Yeah, but all it is chicken McNuggets.
It's good. Something.
Every once in a while they bring French fries or something.
The first time he was a painter, and he was a painter for a few years after that, but then I just decided to complicate it.
You've been with this guy a bazillion years. When are you going to, get hits?
You know what? We're kind of good with things how we are.
Millennials.
Honestly,
Friday, Saturday night, you'll enjoy that also. Great night out. Back dining room for your private parties, or their corporate parties, birthday parties, anniversary parties. All you gotta do is call Trips and book your date for the back dining room, front dining room, bills. has paid for the product over and over and over. And how do you put a price tag on comfort in your home? Explain that to me. Call USA Insulation now if you want to rectify.
As you heard, a delay of less than 50 milliseconds or so is hardly discernible. My take is that in normal operating, a delay of around 200 milliseconds probably won't be noticeable, and a little more might be noticeable but not objectionable. You'll have to decide. Find an old superhet radio and compare it to your SDR. Surprisingly, the computer horsepower seems to have little effect. Switching from a mid-range i5 to an obviously underpowered laptop only slightly lengthened delay. CPU usage by various SDR software is interesting to me in that it discloses a little about the efficiency of the software. In the real world, it probably isn't particularly important, as even a mid-range processor is adequate for everything I've used. It does say something about good programming practices, though. With my own radios, I tried some of the software on this $110 really basic laptop I got at Best Buy. I thought it was worth it to see what would even run on this very basic computer with a Centrino processor. SDR console's CPU usage ran only about 15% with the SDR play. ELAD's SW2 worked very nicely with low CPU usage, even with some wider spectra. You should probably use a computer with a little more horsepower. Just don't write off an old clunker you might have sitting around without trying it. The demands of other software that's running are more often the culprit. Hopefully I got you thinking a little more about taking the SDR plunge, or maybe just getting your feet wet with one of the relatively inexpensive receivers. I hope you now have a better appreciation for the differences among the various hardware and software options, so you can do a little research on your own and make a better buying decision. You can't really go wrong with any of the radios I've mentioned, but there are trade-offs, no matter what you do. The performance of all the direct sampling radios is top-notch. If you really feel the need for knobs and buttons, you can add an ELAD TM2 or an eCoder control panel from Expert, but of course you'll still need your computer. If you're on a tight budget, consider an SDR receiver. I see that SDR Play recently introduced the Duo with 2 hardware receivers for $280. Though for that money you could get a direct sampler like the Calibri Nano or the ELAD S1. That would be my preference. I like my QRP transceivers. I paid about $1,000 each for my 3 SDRs. My modified ALS 600 allows any of them to run 600 watts. They are light and small and inexpensive to ship back to the manufacturer should it ever become necessary. Small has its advantages. You may even find your favorite radio on sale. High-performance, inexpensive SDRs are causing a ripple effect in the used radio market, too. Look for some real bargains. Well, I hope I've given you some things to think about and not just added more confusion. Take the SDR plunge and discover a whole new world.